Deborah Lewis screamed until her throat tasted like iron. The pain came in waves, violent, unforgiving, folding her body in half on the cold kitchen tiles. Her hands clawed at the floor, nails scraping, begging for something solid to hold on to. Somewhere above her, laughter floated down the hallway. Julian's laugh. Vanessa's sharper one. Drama, Julian scoffed. Women exaggerate these things. Deborah tried to speak. Try to say the baby. Try to say I'm dying. Another contraction ripped through her, and the world narrowed to darkness and sound. Her own screams echoing through the apartment like a warning no one wanted to hear. Now, if you love intense African stories full of betrayal, sacrifice, and comeback fire, do me a favor. Like this story, subscribe for more, and drop a comment telling me what part of the world you're watching from. These stories travel far, and I love knowing where they land. Deborah Lewis believed in love the way her mother believed in prayer. Wholeheartedly, stubbornly, without backup plans. She met Julian Brooks on a humid Thursday evening in Lagos, at a co-working space that smelled of burnt coffee and ambition. Deborah had gone there after work, laptop under her arm, chasing freelance design clients. Julian was pacing the room, pitching an idea to anyone who would listen. A digital marketing startup that would revolutionize how African brands told their stories online. He was handsome in an unpolished way, rolled-up sleeves, restless eyes, voice charged with conviction. He spoke like a man who hadn't yet failed enough to be afraid. Deborah listened. That was her first mistake and her first miracle. They started talking that night about algorithms and aesthetics, about how Africa was always portrayed through other people's lenses. Julian said he wanted to change that. Deborah said she already was, one design at a time. He told her, I don't just want success. I want partnership. Those words lodged themselves in her chest. They dated fast, intensely. Julian had big dreams, but thin pockets. Deborah had a stable job at a telecoms company and a quiet confidence that steadied him. When he proposed 6 months later, no ring yet, just a promise, she said yes before he finished the sentence. They married small. No ballroom. No excess. Just witnesses, vows, and faith. Deborah believed marriage meant we rise together. Julian believed it too, at least at first. Julian's startup struggled from day one. Clients came and went. Campaigns flopped. Investors smiled politely and disappeared. Every failure carved something sharp into Julian's pride, and Deborah felt each cut as if it were her own. At first, she helped in small ways. She reviewed pitches at night, redesigned logos for free, stayed up past midnight listening to him rant about gatekeepers and bad luck. She told him, over and over, this is just the process. When his savings ran out, Deborah paid the rent. When his laptop broke, Deborah replaced it. When he suggested she quit her job temporarily, just until the business stabilized, so she could help him full-time, she hesitated. But only briefly. You'll get your career back, Julian promised, cupping her face. Everything I build is for us. So Deborah resigned. Her colleagues were shocked. Her mother cried on the phone. But Deborah smiled through it all, believing sacrifice was temporary when love was real. Reality had other plans. The startup continued to bleed money. Deborah took double shifts, first at a call center, then at a logistics warehouse at night. She learned to sleep in fragments, to eat standing up, to ignore the ache in her feet. She became the spine of their household. Electricity bill? Deborah. Internet? Deborah. Food? Deborah. Julian worked? Yes, but his work was filled with frustration and ego wounds. Each rejection made him smaller, angrier. He stopped thanking her, stopped noticing the exhaustion lining her face. But Deborah noticed him. Every time he slumped on the couch, head in hands, she knelt in front of him and said, one day, this will all make sense. She believed that love meant endurance. She did not know that endurance, without balance, turns into erasure. Months blurred into years. Deborah learned how to stretch meals, how to smile when debt collectors called, how to hide fear behind reassurance. Julian, meanwhile, began to treat her support as entitlement. If dinner was late, he snapped. If she asked about money, he accused her of doubting him. If she mentioned her old career, he said, "You're stuck in the past. Focus on us." Still, Deborah stayed. She reminded herself of his dreams, of the man she married, the man who once said partnership mattered more than pride. At night, when Julian slept, Deborah lay awake staring at the ceiling, calculating bills in her head, whispering prayers into the dark. Let this work. Let his breakthrough come. Let my sacrifice mean something. When she found out she was pregnant, she cried. Not from fear, but from hope. This will change everything, she told herself. She imagined a future where Julian softened, where success arrived gently, where she returned to her career with pride instead of regret. She imagined telling their child, "We struggled, but we loved each other through it." Julian's reaction was muted. "We'll manage," he said, already distracted by his phone. Deborah didn't notice the warning bells. She was too busy building emotional scaffolding around a man who had stopped building her. Pregnancy did not slow Deborah down. It doubled her burden. She worked until her back screamed. She hid morning sickness behind forced smiles. She attended prenatal appointments alone because Julian was busy with investors. She told herself it was temporary. Every sacrifice was justified by the future she kept replaying in her mind. What Deborah didn't understand, what no one tells women like her, is that belief can be weaponized. That loving someone through failure does not guarantee they will love you through success. But at this stage, success had not yet arrived. Only exhaustion, only quiet resentment, only Deborah, holding everything together with tired hands and unwavering faith. And somewhere in the distance, fate was sharpening its knife. Julian's breakthrough did not arrive like a miracle. It arrived like a theft. 1 month, the startup was barely breathing. The next, it was everywhere. A multinational brand picked up one of Julian's campaigns. The numbers exploded: clicks, conversions, contracts. Investors who had once ignored his emails suddenly called him sir. His phone rang endlessly. His name started appearing on tech blogs, then podcasts, then panel flyers. Deborah watched the transformation in real time. At first, she was relieved, almost giddy. "It's happening," she whispered one night, rubbing her pregnant belly as Julian paced the living room, barking orders into his phone. "We made it, but we disappeared faster than the debt ever had." Money did not soften Julian. It hardened him. He stopped asking Deborah's opinion. Then he stopped explaining his decisions. Soon, he stopped coming home on time altogether. Meetings ran late. Dinners went cold. Calls went unanswered. When Deborah asked questions, Julian sighed like she was a burden. "You don't understand business," he said once, waving her off. "This is big league stuff." Big league. As if she hadn't carried him through the amateur years. The first insult slid in quietly. She suggested budgeting, cautious after years of scarcity. Julian laughed, actually laughed. "You're stuck in survival mode," he said. "Try thinking bigger." The second insult came sharper. She asked when she could return to work, maybe part-time. Julian frowned. "Why?" "Because I want my independence." He scoffed. "Don't start acting ungrateful now." Ungrateful. Deborah swallowed the word like poison and told herself success was stressful. That pressure changed people temporarily. She did not yet see that Julian was not stressed. He was enjoying this. Vanessa Reed arrived at the company like a statement. She was young, stylish, confident in a way that came from never having to beg. She laughed loudly in Julian's presence, touched his arm when she spoke, called him visionary in a tone that felt intimate. Deborah met her once, briefly, when she brought lunch to the office. Vanessa looked her up and down with polite curiosity, eyes lingering on Deborah's swollen feet, her loose maternity dress. "Oh," Vanessa said lightly, "you're the wife." Not Deborah, not Mrs. Brooks, just the wife. Julian did not correct her. That was when Deborah felt it, the shift in the air. Something unspoken but heavy. Something that did not belong. Soon, Julian stopped hiding it. He came home smelling like unfamiliar perfume. He answered calls in whispers. He guarded his phone like a secret diary. When Deborah asked if something was wrong, he snapped. "You're paranoid. You're hormonal. You're imagining things." gaslighting wrapped in condescension. The first time Deborah confronted him directly, Julian didn't deny it. He shrugged. "Vanessa understands me," he said. "She's ambitious. She gets the pressure I'm under. And I don't," Deborah asked quietly. Julian looked at her belly, then away. "You're different now." Different. That night, Deborah cried silently in the bathroom, so Julian wouldn't accuse her of being dramatic. She pressed her hands to her stomach, whispering apologies to the life growing inside her. "I will protect you," she promised. She did not know how hard that promise would become to keep. Once Julian tasted power, he wanted control to match it. He insisted on managing all finances for efficiency. He convinced Deborah it made sense. Business taxes, investments, assets. He spoke in jargon until she felt foolish for questioning him. Her name disappeared from accounts. Her access shrank. When she protested, Julian reminded her, coldly, that she no longer had an income. "I take care of everything," he said. "Relax." Relax became silence. Silence became isolation. Julian discouraged her from seeing friends, saying they were bad energy. He complained when she called her mother too often. He said stress wasn't good for the baby. His version of concern always ended with control. Then came a phone. Deborah noticed it missing one afternoon. Julian said he'd taken it to upgrade security. Days passed. No phone. No access to anyone outside the apartment. When she asked for it back, Julian smiled thinly. "You don't need distractions," he said. "Focus on being a mother. Mother, not wife, not partner." Something fragile inside Deborah cracked. But she was pregnant, tired, dependent, and Julian knew it. By the 7th month, Deborah barely recognized her own life. She lived in a beautiful apartment she could not leave without permission. She wore clothes Julian approved of. She ate when he remembered. She slept alone most nights. Vanessa's presence was no longer hidden. Julian mentioned her casually, complaining about her work ethic one moment, praising her brilliance the next. Deborah stopped reacting. Reaction only fed his cruelty. Instead, she held on to one belief like a lifeline. The baby will change him. She imagined Julian holding their child, softened by something primal and real. She imagined apologies, regret, redemption. At night, she talked to her belly. "Your father isn't bad," she whispered. "He's just lost right now." The baby kicked in response, sharp and insistent. Deborah mistook that for agreement. What it really was warning. The day Julian shoved her, not hard, just enough to remind her who had power, Deborah understood the truth. Love would not save her, but fear kept her still. She had no money, no phone, no job, no escape plan. Her body was heavy with life, her steps slow, her options thin. So she stayed. She cooked. She cleaned. She endured the comments, the dismissive looks, the nights Julian didn't come home at all. She counted weeks instead of dreams. Just make it to the birth, she told herself. After that, something will change. She didn't know what. She just knew she couldn't survive like this forever. And somewhere nearby, closer than she realized, someone was already listening. Labor did not announce itself politely. It arrived like betrayal, sudden, vicious, unapologetic. Deborah was washing dishes when the first pain split her in two. The plate slipped from her hands and shattered in the sink. She gasped, gripping the counter as something deep inside her clenched and burned. She breathed, counted, waited. Another wave came, stronger. Her water spilled onto the kitchen floor, warm and undeniable. Deborah's hands shook as realization set in. "It's time." She called out Julian's name, voice thin but urgent. "Julian?" No answer. She shuffled down the hallway, one hand on her belly, the other dragging along the wall for balance. The bedroom door was open. Julian wasn't there, but laughter drifted from the living room. Vanessa's laugh. Deborah's heart sank before her body did. She found them on the couch. Julian relaxed, phone in hand. Vanessa curled beside him like she belonged there. Wine glasses on the table. Music low. Comfort everywhere. "I'm in labor," Deborah said. Julian looked up slowly, annoyed, as if she'd interrupted something important. "So," he said, "false alarm. Deborah bent forward as another contraction tore through her. She cried out, gripping the back of a chair. No, I need to go to the hospital. Now. Vanessa rolled her eyes. She's always dramatic. Julian sighed heavily, standing up at last, but not to help. He paced. Tonight, he snapped. Do you know how inconvenient this is? Inconvenient. Deborah felt the word hit harder than the pain. I can't walk, she whispered. Please. Another contraction slammed into her. Her knees buckled. She fell to the floor, the cold tile biting into her skin. Julian looked down at her like she was something broken he didn't want to deal with. Get up, he said. You're embarrassing yourself. Vanessa laughed softly. She probably just wants attention. Deborah screamed then. Not for drama, not for sympathy, but because her body was splitting open and no one cared. Julian, she begged. I'm scared. For a moment, just one, she thought she saw hesitation in his eyes. Then Vanessa stood, smoothing her dress. If you leave now, you'll miss the investor call, she said. She can wait. And Julian chose. He grabbed his jacket. Call me when it's serious, he said, stepping over Deborah's body like an obstacle. Don't bleed on the floor. The door slammed. The apartment fell silent except for Deborah's screams. Time stopped making sense. Deborah lay on the kitchen floor, sweat soaking her clothes, pain ripping through her in relentless waves. Her throat burned from screaming. Her body shook uncontrollably. She tried to crawl. Her arms gave out. She pressed her forehead to the tile, tears dripping into the cracks, and whispered prayers she hadn't said since childhood. God, please. Another contraction came. Stronger. Closer. She screamed again, raw, animal, desperate. The sound echoed through the apartment walls, through the ceiling, through the floor, and through one door next door. Dr. Marcus Hale had been awake for 26 hours. Trauma shifts did that to you. Turned time into a blur of blood, alarms, and split-second decisions. He had just dropped his keys on the counter when he heard it. A scream. Not loud at first. Just wrong. He froze. Years in emergency rooms had trained his ears. This wasn't drunken laughter or a bad argument. This was pain with no filter. Pain that meant danger. Then he heard again, closer, sharper. A woman screaming like she was fighting for her life. Marcus didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and rushed to the neighboring apartment, knocking hard. Hello? Are you okay? No answer. Another scream, muffled, weak. Marcus kicked the door. The lock splintered. The door flew open. What he saw made his chest tighten. A pregnant woman, very pregnant, collapsed on the kitchen floor, soaked in sweat and fluid, her face pale, eyes unfocused. Oh God, Marcus muttered, already moving. He knelt beside her, checking her pulse, her breathing, his voice calm and controlled despite the surge of anger burning in his chest. Hey, my name is Marcus. I'm a doctor. You're not alone, okay? Deborah's eyes fluttered open. She sobbed at the sound of his voice. My husband, she gasped. He left. Marcus swallowed hard. Okay, he said firmly. We don't have time to talk about that. You're in active labor. How far apart are the contractions? Minutes, she whispered. It hurts. It hurts so bad. I know, Marcus said, gently lifting her head. But you're doing great. We're going to the hospital. Now. He called for an ambulance while applying pressure where needed, mentally running through worst-case scenarios. Prolonged labor. Stress. Possible complications. Someone should have brought her hours ago. The rage sat heavy in his gut, but he pushed it down. There was only one thing that mattered now. Saving her. The ambulance arrived fast. Marcus rode with her, holding her hand as the sirens wailed through the night. Deborah screamed, cried, cursed, prayed, all of it spilling out while Marcus anchored her with steady words. Breathe with me. You're safe. Your baby's heart rate is strong. Each sentence was a rope pulling her back from the edge. Deborah clung to him like he was the last solid thing left in the world. At the hospital doors, Marcus handed her over to the maternity team, rattling off medical details with precision. He didn't leave. Not when they moved her to the delivery room. Not when the pain peaked. Not when she begged someone, anyone, not to let her die. He stayed, because he knew what it was like to lose everything in a single night. And because no woman deserved to bring life into the world alone, especially not after being left to die on a kitchen floor. Hospitals have a sound at night, a low hum of machines, distant footsteps, whispers that never quite sleep. Deborah drifted in and out of consciousness as the contractions intensified, each one stronger than the last, pulling her further from the woman she used to be. Marcus never left her side. He stood close, but not intrusive, a steady presence in the chaos. When nurses came and went, adjusting monitors and murmuring clinical terms, he translated everything into calm, human language. "You're progressing," he told her softly. "Your body knows what to do." Deborah didn't feel like her body knew anything. It felt like it was tearing her apart. "I can't," she sobbed at one point, gripping the sheets. "I can't do this." Marcus leaned closer, his voice firm but gentle. "You already are." She searched his face. This stranger who had broken down a door for her, who had heard her screams when the man who vowed to love her had ignored them. "Where is he?" she whispered, even though she already knew. Marcus didn't lie. He hasn't come. The truth hurt, but not as much as false hope would have. Another contraction came, and Deborah screamed, tears streaming down her face. Marcus held her hand, grounding her, counting breaths when she couldn't. "You're not alone," he kept saying. "I'm here." Those words became her anchor. Hours blurred together. Pain peaked and crashed like waves against her spine. Deborah felt herself splitting open, felt fear claw at her chest. But beneath it all was something else. Determination. When the nurse said, "It's time to push," Deborah laughed hysterically through tears. Marcus met her eyes. This is the part where everything changes. She pushed. Once. Twice. Again, screaming, shaking, emptying herself of pain and grief and years of swallowed endurance. And then, a cry. Sharp. Alive. Real. The room shifted. Deborah collapsed back against the pillows as the sound filled the space, cutting through everything she had suffered. Tears poured down her temples as they placed the baby on her chest. A tiny, warm, trembling miracle. "A girl," the nurse said, smiling. Deborah laughed and cried at the same time, her hands shaking as they wrapped around her child. "She's beautiful," Marcus said quietly, softening his voice. Deborah looked down at the small face, scrunched and angry and perfect. In that moment, the world narrowed to this child. This proof that something good could come from cruelty. "Faith," Deborah whispered. Marcus blinked. "Faith. That's her name," Deborah said, kissing her daughter's forehead. "Because I survived on it, and she's the reason I will again." Faith curled her fingers around Deborah's thumb. Impossibly small, impossibly strong. Deborah felt something settle in her chest. Julian had missed this. The first breath, the first cry, the moment a woman became a mother. And for the first time, Deborah understood that his absence was not her loss. It was his. Days passed. Deborah waited, not with hope, but with a quiet, aching curiosity. She told herself Julian would come eventually. That surely, once the shock wore off, he would appear at the hospital door, humbled, remorseful. He didn't. No calls, no messages, no flowers. The nurses stopped asking about the father. Marcus visited when he could, bringing fruit, checking on Faith, making sure Deborah ate. He never overstepped, never asked questions she wasn't ready to answer. But his presence highlighted Julian's absence like a bruise pressed too often. Deborah watched other women receive visitors. Husbands pacing nervously, grandparents crying with joy, families crowding hallways. She felt the loneliness creep in late at night, when Faith slept and the room went quiet. How did my life become this? She wondered. Julian appeared on the fourth day, not with apologies, not with regret. He arrived in a tailored suit, confidence polished to a shine, Vanessa waiting in the car downstairs. He didn't ask to hold the baby, didn't ask how Deborah was feeling. He handed her an envelope. "Sign these," he said flatly. Deborah stared at the papers, then at him. "What is this?" "Divorce," Julian replied, "and a termination of parental rights." The words landed heavy, but strangely dull. "You came here for this?" Deborah asked. I don't have time for drama, Julian said. My brand can't handle scandal. A messy family situation doesn't look good. Deborah laughed, a hollow, broken sound. You left me on the floor, she said. I could have died. Julian shrugged. You didn't. Something inside Deborah finally snapped, not violently, but cleanly, like a rope that had been fraying for years. She signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. Julian didn't look back as he left. Faith stirred in Deborah's arms, letting out a small cry. Deborah kissed her head, tears falling silently. It's okay, she whispered. We're free. Marcus watched Julian leave the hospital from the hallway. He didn't follow him. He stayed where he belonged, beside the woman and child Julian had discarded. And as Deborah looked down at Faith, holding her close, she didn't yet know how much her life was about to change again. But this time, change was coming with protection. Deborah did not leave the hospital strong. She left hollowed out, stitched together by exhaustion, survival, and a baby who depended on her for everything. Faith slept against her chest, small and warm, unaware that she had been born into absence. Marcus drove them himself. The car ride was quiet except for the hum of traffic and Faith's soft breathing. Deborah watched the city pass by, shops opening, people laughing, life continuing as if hers hadn't cracked open. When Marcus pulled into the driveway of his house, she frowned. I can't stay here, she said quickly. I don't want to be a burden. Marcus turned to her, calm as ever. You're not. And this is temporary until you're steady. She hesitated. Pride fought with reality. Reality won. His home was modest, warm, filled with the kind of quiet that didn't feel lonely. A guest room had already been prepared, clean sheets, a crib borrowed from a colleague, groceries stocked without announcement. Deborah cried that night, not from pain, but from relief. For the first time in years, she slept without fear. The days that followed were slow, deliberate, human. Marcus never hovered. He never asked for gratitude. He cooked when Deborah was too tired, watched Faith when Deborah showered, left space when silence was needed. Deborah learned to rest. She learned that healing did not always come with dramatic breakthroughs. Sometimes it came with warm soup, with uninterrupted sleep, with someone asking, "How are you really?" and meaning it. Marcus carried his own grief quietly. Late at night, Deborah sometimes found him sitting on the porch, staring into nothing. When she finally asked, gently, he told her about his wife, about the car accident, about the baby they never got to meet. I couldn't save them, he said simply. That kind of loss rewires you. Deborah listened. No fixing, just presence. In the space between shared pain, something honest grew. Not romance at first, but trust. Safety. Choice. Weeks turned into months. Deborah began freelancing again. Design work, remote contracts. Her confidence returned piece by piece. She laughed more. She stopped flinching at raised voices. Faith grew stronger, louder, full of life. Marcus watched them both with quiet wonder. Julian resurfaced when Faith was nearly 6 months old. Not because he missed her, because his company had gone public. A family man image played well with investors. Articles wanted the full story. PR advisors suggested reconciliation, or at least custody optics. Julian filed for visitation. Deborah's hand shook when she received the notice. I won't let him take her, she whispered. Marcus didn't panic. He nodded once. He won't. Julian underestimated two things, Deborah's resilience and Marcus's precision. Marcus had recorded everything that night. The screams, the mocking voices, the abandonment. He had documented hospital records, police reports, timestamps. In court, Julian spoke smoothly. He talked about mistakes, about growth, about wanting to do right. Then Marcus spoke. Calm, clear, unemotional. He played the recordings. The courtroom went silent. Julian's face drained of color. The judge didn't need long. Custody denied. Parental rights permanently terminated. Protective order issued. Julian's brand took a hit it couldn't spin. Deborah walked out of that courtroom shaking, but victorious. Life didn't explode into perfection after that. It settled. Marcus formally adopted Faith, not to replace anyone, but to protect her. Deborah cried through the paperwork, overwhelmed by the simplicity of it. "You don't have to," she told him. "I know," Marcus replied. "I want to." Love arrived quietly, without control, without fear, without conditions. One night, months later, Deborah watched Marcus teaching Faith how to clap, his laughter genuine, unguarded. Something in her chest loosened completely. This was family, not built on vows spoken too early, not built on sacrifice demanded, but on choice, protection, and love that did not hurt. Years later, Deborah would tell Faith the truth, not the ugly details, but the lesson. That love should never leave you on the floor. That success without character is failure. That family is who shows up when it matters. And every time Faith laughed, safe, confident, free, Deborah knew the revenge wasn't destruction. It was survival. It was joy. It was the life she rebuilt with her own hands.